Imagine, imagine waiting for a piece of mail for 30 years.
Yeah, that's a long time to wait for the postman.
Right, like you filled out this highly complex form, you checked every single box, you handed it to the federal government back in, I don't know, 1990.
Wow, 1990.
And you have literally been checking your mailbox for an answer every single day since then. 30 years of waiting for a decision that could, fundamentally alter your financial reality, your access to medical care, your family's whole future.
It's completely life-altering.
Exactly. And eventually you just assume the paper vanished into some infinite frozen bureaucratic void, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate nightmare scenario for anyone who relies on a massive institutional system.
Mm-hmm.
You are completely paralyzed because the machinery that is meant to, process your life has simply stopped recognizing that you even exist.
But then, imagine waking up today and finding out that same frozen bureaucracy is suddenly processing 2 million new claims at the speed of a high-speed freight train.
Which is exactly what we're seeing right now.
Yes. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a fascinating, almost, whiplash-inducing contradiction inside the Department of Veterans Affairs.
It really is whiplash.
It is. We're breaking down the massive operational shifts from the week of June 8 to June 14th, 2026. And for you listening, what we are seeing is an institution desperately hitting the gas pedal on speed and technology.
Setting absolute records for how fast it clears paperwork, yeah.
Right, while simultaneously trying to outrun the ghosts of its own historical failures.
The tension here is just palpable. You have an organization that is, frankly, pushing the boundaries of medical science.
Oh, for sure.
They're deploying virtual reality to rewire the brains of chronic pain patients. They're streamlining global supply chains. But underneath that shiny high-speed exterior, there are these deep systemic fault lines.
Yeah, the foundational cracks are still there.
Exactly. We're talking about jaw-dropping disparities in how different types of trauma are evaluated, predators basically circling the system to exploit loopholes, and this agonizing 554-page legislative battle over how to actually pay for the promises the country has made.
It's wild. It really is a masterclass in the friction that occurs when you try to modernize a behemoth.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with this aggressive, almost unprecedented push for speed, because the raw numbers coming out of the VA right now are just staggering.
They really are.
Like on June 10th, they crossed the threshold of 2 million disability claims processed in a single fiscal year.
2 million.
2 million. And they hit that mark by June 1, which is weeks, if not months, earlier than they have ever reached that volume in the entire history of the agency.
Right. But to really understand the scale of that momentum, you have to look at the micro-level experience.
What do you mean?
Well, the actual wait time for the individual veteran. Because, look, an agency boasting about 2 million processed claims means absolutely nothing to the person sitting at their kitchen table waiting for a check.
Right. They don't care about the macro data. They care about their own mailbox.
Exactly. But the internal metrics show a really dramatic shift. At the end of May, the average time to complete a claim fell to 78.6 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you rewind to just January of 2025, that exact same average wait time was 141.5 days.
Wait, so they cut it almost in half?
Basically, yeah. They have essentially cut the waiting period in half in under 18 months.
Which is just an incredible logistical feat. And I assume that's reflecting in their backlog numbers too, right?
Absolutely.
Because if I remember correctly, a claim is officially labeled as backlogged once it's been sitting unresolved for more than 125 days.
That's right. That 125-day marker is an industry standard for massive insurance and benefits apparatuses.
Gotcha. And for the first time since 2020, that backlog has actually fallen below 75,000 and stayed there for over a month.
Which is huge, because when claims sit longer than that 125-day mark, the data shows that the probability of the applicant falling into financial distress or missing critical medical interventions, it just skyrockets.
It creates a domino effect.
Exactly. So driving that backlog number down isn't just about clearing a desk. I mean, it is about stopping a cascade of secondary crises in a veteran's life.
But wait, I have to jump in here.
Sure.
Because whenever an organization of this size suddenly announces they are moving twice as fast, my skeptical alarms start ringing super loud.
Oh, I don't blame you.
Like, how do you double the speed of a complex medical and legal review without completely destroying the quality of the work?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Are they just, rubber stamping denied on thousands of files a day just to clear the inbox and make the secretary's metrics look good? If a hospital suddenly announces they are doing heart surgeries in half the time, my first question is, Um, are you still remembering to sew the patients back up?
That instinct to question the quality is entirely justified. Because usually when you apply maximum pressure to a pipeline, the quality control is the very first thing to fracture.
Always.
However, the internal reporting from the VA claims their accuracy rate has, paradoxically, improved alongside the volume.
Wait, really? It went
Right?
up.
Yeah, they are reporting a 94% accuracy rate on these claims, which they state is the highest sustained accuracy in 2 years.
That's hard to believe.
And they point to the financial output to counter the idea of mass denials, too. They've authorized over $124 billion in compensation and pension payouts so far this year alone.
124 billion. Okay.
Right.
But 94% accuracy. Let's look at the nuts and bolts of that. Who is actually grading the accuracy? Is the VA just grading itself?
Yeah, essentially. They utilize these internal quality review teams.
Okay.
And those teams pull randomized samples of completed claims to audit them against the legal statutes and the medical evidence.
Right, so it's an internal audit.
It is, which inherently carries a degree of bias, obviously, but it is standardized. The more critical nuance here, though, is to look at how they are achieving this speed.
Right.
Because it hasn't been without severe friction.
Right, because earlier this year, didn't they try to deploy some automated tool to scan through like 1.2 million older claims?
Yes. The idea was to have a machine algorithm flag files for potential fraud just to save human adjudicators the time of reading every single page.
Which sounds efficient on paper, but I could see how that goes wrong.
Oh, it triggered an absolute firestorm. Veterans advocacy groups revolted.
I bet.
The concern was algorithmic bias. The fear that a piece of software, which is, trained on historical data that might already contain systemic prejudices, would blindly flag complex, nuanced cases for fraud just because they fit a certain statistical pattern.
Right, so the machine says, this looks weird, and suddenly your benefits are paused.
Exactly. The blowback was so intense that the VA completely scrapped the automated scanning program in March.
Wow, they just folded it completely.
Yeah, it's a perfect illustration of the limits of efficiency.
Yeah.
You can optimize the supply chain all you want, but the moment veterans feel like a machine is judging the validity of their service and their suffering, the trust completely evaporates.
And there is another massive caveat to this speed narrative, right?
Yeah.
A faster decision does not magically guarantee it is the correct decision for that veteran's specific biological reality.
That's a crucial point.
If a veteran believes their rating is too low or the VA completely misunderstood their medical evidence, they have to enter the appeals process. And that road is a totally different story.
Oh, completely different. The appeals pipeline is fundamentally a legal battleground, whereas the initial claim is mostly just an administrative process.
Right.
In an appeal, you are arguing case law, precedents, statutory interpretation. So while the front door of the VA, the initial claim, is processing at breakneck speed, the appeals process remains incredibly dense and notoriously slow.
So speeding up the initial no doesn't really help if it takes 3 years to get the eventual yes. Okay, so the paperwork machinery is humming, but with some serious structural stress fractures. Let's look at how this push for speed translates to physical, tangible medical care.
Okay.
Specifically, I'm looking at the massive policy shift regarding prosthetic limbs.
Yes. This is an area where bureaucratic red tape was literally keeping people immobilized.
Literally.
On April 22, the VA secretary signed a rule exempting roughly 95% of all prosthetic limb orders from having to go through a contracting officer review.
Okay, for you listening to truly grasp the impact of this, we need to break down what a contracting officer actually does and why they were ever involved in medical devices in the first place.
Right. So a contracting officer in the federal government is highly trained in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR.
The FAR, yeah.
Their entire job is to ensure the government is getting fair market value, preventing fraud, and adhering to incredibly strict competitive bidding laws.
Okay, that makes sense.
Historically, every time a VA doctor prescribed a custom prosthetic limb, the order had to leave the medical pipeline and enter the procurement pipeline. The contracting officer had to review the specifications, negotiate with the vendor, and sign off on the price.
Which sounds completely reasonable on paper, You want to protect the taxpayer. But what does that actually look like in practice for the 45,000 veterans who rely on the VA for limb care every single year?
Well, in practice, it meant a veteran whose residual limb was ready for a socket, someone who had completed all their preliminary physical therapy, was sent home to sit in a wheelchair for an average of 94 days.
94 days, just waiting.
Just waiting. The contracting review added weeks of dead time. Because the officer isn't a doctor, they're a financial auditor. They are looking at spreadsheets, not patients.
And think about the biological reality of that delay for a second. If you lose a leg, your residual limb undergoes massive physical changes over time. The muscles atrophy, the swelling fluctuates daily. If you have to wait 3 months for a socket to arrive, by the time it gets there, your leg might have completely changed shape.
And then the multi-million-dollar piece of equipment doesn't even fit anymore.
Exactly. It is essentially requiring a financial auditor to sign off on a doctor's prescription before you are allowed to even stand up and walk.
And that is exactly why the system was overhauled. The new rule allows local purchasing agents at the individual VA hospitals to bypass the contracting officers entirely for the vast majority of orders.
How are they bypassing it legally, though?
They are utilizing a very clever administrative workaround. If Medicare has already negotiated and set a fixed price for a specific prosthetic component, the VA local agent can just use that price and buy it directly from the local vendor.
Oh, wow. So if the government has already established the price ceiling through Medicare, there is literally nothing left for the VA contracting officer to negotiate anyway.
Exactly. Their review was completely redundant.
That's brilliant.
The impact of removing that redundancy is profound. The VA projects that once this is fully implemented nationwide, the average wait time for a prosthetic will plummet from 94 days to 54 days.
A 40-day reduction. I mean, that is nearly 6 weeks of a human being's life given back to them.
Yes, 6 extra weeks.
6 weeks where they can begin gait training, go back to work, or simply walk around their house without assistance. It is just a stunning example of how simply removing a single signature from a workflow can alter the physical trajectory of thousands of lives.
It also demonstrates a pretty huge shift in institutional philosophy, honestly.
How so?
They are prioritizing clinical momentum over granular financial auditing. They're essentially accepting a marginally higher risk of maybe paying retail price for a component in exchange for getting the veteran mobile 2 months faster.
Which is the right trade-off, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
And the final piece of this operational speed puzzle is the digital infrastructure holding all of this together. On June 6th, they expanded the new Federal Electronic Health Record System into 4 major hospitals across Ohio and Kentucky.
Right. And the rollout of this system, which they now have live in places like Cincinnati and Dayton, reaching over 100,000 veterans in that region alone, is arguably the most critical and complex undertaking in the agency's modern history.
It's a massive IT project.
Massive. We are talking about migrating decades of fragmented, localized patient data into a single, unified, cloud-based architecture.
Now, I know database architecture sounds incredibly dry, but the concept of interoperability here is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
What does this new Federal Electronic Health Record actually replace? What were they using before?
For decades, the VA utilized a system called VISTA. VISTA.
Okay.
Now, VISTA was revolutionary when it was built back in the 1970s and 80s, but it was heavily decentralized.
Meaning what?
Meaning a VA hospital in Ohio might have a customized version of VISTA that couldn't easily talk to the VISTA system in a VA hospital in Florida.
Oh, so they were siloed.
Very siloed. Furthermore, the Department of Defense had its own entirely separate medical record system.
Of course they did.
So when a soldier transitioned out of the military and became a veteran, their medical history didn't automatically cross the street with them. It required printing thousands of pages of records, physically carrying them to the VA, and having a clerk retype or scan them into the new system.
The margin for error there is just terrifying. You drop a box of files in the hallway, and suddenly a veteran's history of adverse reactions to anesthesia just ceases to exist in their new record.
Precisely. The new system is designed to be completely interoperable. The record originates the day you enlist in the military, follows you through every deployment, every base hospital, and seamlessly transitions with you into the VA system when you retire.
That is how it should have been all along.
And it gets better. It integrates with participating civilian hospitals, too.
Really?
Yeah. If you have a heart attack while on vacation and end up in a private emergency room, that civilian attending physician can securely access your complete federal medical history instantly.
So it's basically having a universal passport for your own biology. And this isn't just about avoiding duplicate blood tests, right? There is a specific tool inside this new software called the Individual Longitudinal Exposure Record that totally changes the game for disability claims. Let's talk about that.
The Individual Longitudinal Exposure Record, or ILOR, is a monumental leap forward in environmental medicine.
Okay, break that down for us.
Historically, proving that you were exposed to a toxic substance during service was the absolute hardest part of filing a claim.
Right, like Agent Orange or burn pits.
Exactly. A veteran would say, I have respiratory issues because I was stationed near a burn pit in Iraq in 2004, and the VA would demand proof.
Like paper proof.
Yes. The veteran would have to somehow find old unit logs, deployment rosters, and sworn statements from buddies just to prove they were standing near a fire 20 years ago.
Which is an absurd burden of proof to place on a sick person. I mean, how are you supposed to track down a guy you served with 20 years ago when you could barely breathe?
You usually can't. But this new longitudinal record actively tracks those exposures in real time. It cross-references a service member's physical location data with environmental hazard reports.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if there is a chemical spill on a base or a known burn pit operating in a sector, the system tags the electronic medical record of every single service member deployed to that specific grid coordinate.
That is incredible.
Years later, when that veteran files a claim for asthma or cancer, the adjudicator simply opens the digital file, sees the tagged exposure from 2004, and grants the service connection. It removes the burden of historical detective work entirely from the veteran.
It bridges the gap between the medical reality and the bureaucratic requirement.
Exactly.
So we've looked at the machinery. The VA is clearing the paperwork backlog. They are bypassing the red tape for physical prosthetics, and they are wiring the global network together. They are fixing the supply lines. But what happens at the end of that supply line?
The actual care.
Exactly. How are they fundamentally changing the actual medicine being practiced?
Well, that brings us to one of the most fascinating developments in pain management in the last decade. The VA is systematically attempting to replace pills with pixels.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The VA has added a program called Relieve ARCs to the federal supply schedule. It is a completely drug-free, virtual reality-based therapy for chronic pain. And adding it to the federal supply schedule is essentially throwing the gates wide open.
It really is, because adding a therapy to the federal supply schedule means the government has pre-vetted the vendor, they've negotiated the master pricing, and they've authorized the intervention universally.
So no more begging for pilot programs.
Exactly. Any VA doctor in any clinic in the country can now write a prescription for this VR headset without having to beg a regional director for special funding. The friction for the provider is just gone.
Let's dive deep into how this actually works. Because when most people hear virtual reality for pain, the immediate assumption is distraction.
Right, like playing a game.
Yeah, you put a headset on a guy with a bad back, you have him play a virtual bowling game or look at a 3D beach, and he temporarily forgets his back hurts. But this is FDA-authorized medical software. This isn't a video game.
Far from it. It is a profound application of neurobiology. Relieve Yarks is an 8-week, highly structured program designed specifically for patients who have suffered from chronic pain for more than 3 months.
Okay, more than 3 months.
Yeah. To understand how it works, we have to differentiate between acute pain and chronic pain.
Let's do that.
If you touch a hot stove, your nerves send an immediate acute pain signal to your brain to tell you to move your hand. That is nociceptive pain. It is a vital survival mechanism.
Right. The alarm system is functioning correctly. You want that alarm.
Exactly. But with chronic pain, the alarm system actually breaks. After months or years of persistent pain signals, perhaps from a traumatic injury sustained in combat, or just the cumulative wear and tear of carrying a 100-pound rucksack for years, the central nervous system undergoes a change.
What kind of change?
It's called central sensitization. The brain becomes hyperreactive. It starts perceiving normal sensory input as painful. The neural pathways dedicated to pain literally become thicker and more efficient.
Wow.
Yeah, so the pain is no longer just a symptom of an injury. The pain itself becomes the disease.
The brain literally gets stuck in a feedback loop of agony.
Precisely.
So how does putting screens in front of your eyes break a neurological loop?
The VR program employs a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness training, and active biofeedback. When a veteran puts on the headset, they aren't just passively watching a beach. They are placed in highly immersive, interactive environments designed to trigger neuroplasticity.
The brain's ability to rewire itself.
Yes. The software guides them through specific breathing and cognitive exercises. And because the visual and auditory immersion of VR is so total, it can essentially hijack the visual cortex and the somatic sensory cortex simultaneously.
So it basically overwhelms the brain's processing capacity with calming, structured inputs, right? forcing the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response, to power down.
That's a great way to put it. And by guiding the patient through cognitive behavioral therapy within that highly receptive state, the program teaches the brain how to recontextualize the pain signals.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
It helps the patient decouple the physical sensation of pain from the emotional panic and stress that usually accompanies it. It is literally training the brain to turn down the volume dial on the central nervous system.
Which is crucial, because for decades, the only way we knew how to turn down that volume dial was to flood the brain with heavy narcotics.
Right. And the context of the opioid epidemic cannot be overstated here. The veteran community was disproportionately devastated by the overprescription of opioids in the late 90s and 2000s.
It was awful.
And the VA has spent the last decade aggressively tapering patients off these highly addictive, often lethal medications. But you cannot simply take away a patient's pain medication without offering a viable alternative.
Because if you do, you just leave them in a vacuum of suffering.
Precisely. ReliefEX represents a scalable, non-chemical alternative. It attacks the biopsychosocial nature of pain. It recognizes that chronic pain destroys sleep, it triggers severe depression, and it ruins mobility.
It affects everything.
Right. By addressing the cognitive and neurological processing of the pain, patients report not just a reduction in physical agony, but massive improvements in their sleep architecture and their overall mood.
And they're deploying this at scale, too.
Hmm.
We aren't talking about a boutique trial at one flagship hospital in D.C. They have pushed over 4,700 of these headsets out to more than 170 medical centers across the globe.
Yeah, including clinics in Guam and American Samoa.
But, we should caution that this isn't magic.
Right. We must remain grounded in the clinical reality here. VR is not a magic wand. It will not reconstruct a shattered vertebra or regrow severed nerve endings.
Obviously not.
The clinical data shows that while it provides significant relief for many, there is a subset of patients who do not respond to it at all, or who experience, simulation sickness from the headsets. It is a powerful tool in the toolkit, but it is not a universal cure.
Still, it represents a massive leap in how the institution views the mind-body connection.
Absolutely.
The medical side of the VA is embracing the nuance of psychology, trauma, and neurology. And this is a pretty violent pivot in our analysis. When you leave the medical clinic and walk over to the benefits administration side of the VA, that nuance completely evaporates.
It really does. It's night and day.
Yeah. When it comes to evaluating the psychological impact of trauma for disability compensation, the bureaucracy is still operating in the dark ages.
And this brings us to a deeply troubling discrepancy highlighted in a sweeping report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Congress actually commissioned this report to examine how the VA adjudicates claims for military sexual trauma, or MST.
Okay, and what do they find?
The findings reveal a glaring systemic inequity in how evidence is weighed.
Yeah, the numbers in this report are just a gut punch. They analyzed claims filed between October 2017 and May 2022. If a veteran filed a disability claim stemming from injuries sustained in combat, they faced an 18.2% denial rate.
Okay.
But if a veteran filed a claim stemming from military sexual trauma, the denial rate jumped to 27.6%.
A nearly 10-point gap.
Yeah.
And the report goes further, noting that this disparity is actually compounded by demographics. Male veterans who report MST face even higher denial rates, and Black veterans experience the highest denial rates of all.
It's terrible.
To understand why this is happening, we have to look at the rigid, archaic rules governing the burden of proof.
Why does this system demand a different level of proof for different types of trauma? I mean, trauma is trauma.
It traces back to a major policy shift in 2010. Prior to 2010, if you claimed PTSD from combat, the VA demanded you prove the specific firefight or IED explosion happened by producing official action reports or unit logs.
Which is tough to get.
Because the problem was, in the chaos of a war zone, paperwork is rarely a priority.
Right.
A soldier could be in a terrifying, traumatic ambush that was never officially logged. So, in 2010, the VA modernized. They stated that for combat PTSD, they would accept lay statements, letters from fellow soldiers, spouses, or friends, describing the veteran's change in behavior as sufficient evidence that the stressor occurred.
They finally acknowledged the reality of the environment. But they didn't extend that logic to sexual trauma.
Exactly. When a survivor of military sexual trauma files a claim, particularly for a secondary physical condition caused by the trauma, like chronic pelvic pain, severe migraines, or fibromyalgia, current federal law binds the hands of the adjudicators.
How so?
To establish the service connection for those secondary physical ailments, the system frequently demands contemporaneous official medical or police records from the time of the assault.
And this is where the logic of the bureaucracy fundamentally collides with the reality of human psychology, and specifically military culture. Think about the environment for you listening. The military is the most rigid, hierarchical organization on the planet. It is built entirely on the concept of unit cohesion, the chain of command, and the uniform code of military justice.
The pressure to maintain the integrity of the unit is drilled into a recruit from their very first day of basic training.
Right. So imagine a scenario where a young service member is assaulted by someone in their own squad, or worse, by a superior officer in their direct chain of command. The system the victim is supposed to report the crime to is controlled by the very people they are trying to report.
It's an impossible situation.
The fear of retaliation, the fear of destroying their own career, the fear of being ostracized by their unit while deployed in a hostile environment, the systemic pressure forcing that survivor into silence is just overwhelming.
The National Academy's report explicitly dissects this exact phenomenon. The committee included Dr. Harold Kudler, who is a prominent psychiatrist with decades of experience at the VA, and his analysis is just piercing.
What did he say?
He points out that even in the civilian world, the vast majority of sexual assaults are never reported to the police. The psychological shock, the shame, and the trauma fundamentally inhibit the victim from seeking out a bureaucratic authority in the immediate aftermath.
And yet, the VA's benefit system looks at a veteran 30 years later, sees the severe migraines and the crushing depression, and says, well, you didn't file a police report on the day it happened, so we cannot prove it is connected to your service.
Yeah.
Claim denied.
Yeah.
It is actively penalizing the veteran for reacting to trauma in the exact way human biology and military culture condition them to react.
Dr. Kudler asks the definitive question: why does the entire architecture of the benefits process rest on a specific piece of paper, a police report that every statistical model and psychological study proves most survivors will never create?
It makes no sense.
It is a standard of evidence that is practically designed to fail.
So how do we fix a system that demands paperwork for an event that inherently leaves no paper trail?
Well, the National Academies Committee issued a formal recommendation to Congress. They urged lawmakers to establish a single, unified standard of evidence for all trauma claims.
What does that mean in practice?
Specifically, they are asking Congress to pass a law forcing the VA to accept a veteran's own personal narrative of the trauma, backed by lay statements from family or friends, as sufficient proof that the event occurred.
So extending that 2010 combat PTSD logic to all secondary MST claims.
Precisely. It would completely remove the absolute barrier of the missing police report. Now, to be clear, this wouldn't automatically grant the financial compensation.
Right, there's still steps.
Yes. The veteran would still have to undergo an examination by a VA clinician, and that clinician would have to establish a clear medical nexus, a scientific link between the trauma described and the current physical diagnosis. The veteran's narrative would also have to broadly align with the dates and locations in their service record.
But it would at least level the evidentiary playing field.
Yes, exactly. The report also strongly advocates for overhauling how the VA trains the examiners who conduct these evaluations.
That's critical.
They want mandatory, rigorous training in trauma-informed care and military cultural competency. They want examiners who actually understand why a victim might have a fragmented memory of the event, rather than assuming a fragmented memory is proof of a lie.
But the critical takeaway for the listener here is that this 300-page report, despite all its scientific weight, is merely advice, right?
Sadly, yes.
The National Academies cannot force the VA to change a single rule. It requires an act of Congress to change the statutory evidence requirements. And until a bill is written, debated, and signed into law, that 27.6% denial rate will likely persist.
It is a heartbreaking reality. The medical side of the VA is living in 2026, using virtual reality to heal the brain, while the benefit side is trapped in an archaic legal framework that doesn't understand human trauma.
Right.
But this rigid demand for a perfect paper trail creates an entirely different nightmare when the VA itself is the one losing the paper. If a veteran can be denied because they lack a police report, what happens when the veteran does everything right, files the exact required form, and the government simply loses it in a filing cabinet for 3 decades?
And that transitions us from the tragedy of missing evidence to the sheer logistical absurdity of missing files. We are looking at a massive class action lawsuit called Freund v. Collins, which is heading to a critical fairness hearing in a federal court in Washington, D.C. on August 13th.
This lawsuit represents veterans who were trapped in the VA's legacy appeals system. We are talking about appeals that were abruptly closed by the agency because the VA claimed the veterans missed a deadline and failed to file a highly specific document called the substantive appeal form.
Okay, to understand the mechanism of this failure, we have to look at how the old legacy system worked prior to the Major Appeals Reform Act of 2017. Under the old rules, if your initial claim was denied, you couldn't just say, "I appeal." You had to file a notice of disagreement. Then the VA would send you a massive document explaining why they denied you. After you received that, you had a strict 60-day window to file the substantive appeal form, also known as VA Form 9.
And if that piece of paper didn't physically land on a desk in a VA regional office within 60 days, your appeal was legally dead.
And the plaintiffs in this class action are stepping forward and saying, "Hey, I mailed you that form, I met the deadline, and you closed my case anyway."
The timeline of this class action is what makes it so breathtaking. The U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims has certified a class that encompasses appeal files closed between December 12, 1990 and February 6, 2025.
Think about the temporal scale of that for a second.
1990?
The first Gulf War was just beginning. The internet as we know it didn't even exist. A veteran could have mailed this form, had it received by a mailroom clerk in a massive VA regional office, and had it dropped into the wrong manila folder. And because of that single clerical error 30 years ago, they have lived their entire adult life without the benefits they bled for.
And if you understand the physical reality of a VA regional office in the 1990s and 2000s, it is honestly a miracle more files weren't lost.
What were they like?
Before the system was digitized, veteran claims files called C-files were physical monstrosities. A single veteran's file could be 2 feet thick, held together by rubber bands.
2 feet thick.
Yes. They were stacked on rolling carts in subterranean file caves. A single substantive appeal form is just a few pieces of paper. If a clerk accidentally slipped it into the file of the veteran sitting next to it on the cart, that appeal was functionally erased from existence.
So how does the proposed settlement aim to fix a 30-year-old filing error? Because those paper mountains are mostly scanned now, right?
Well, if the federal judge approves the settlement on August 13th, the VA is going to be ordered to execute a massive manual archaeological dig.
Manual.
The agency has utilized its internal databases to identify 28,258 specific closed files that showed digital anomalies, basically markers suggesting that a substantive appeal form might actually be physically trapped inside the folder, completely ignored. Under the agreement, the VA has 18 months to put human eyes on every single one of those 28,258 files.
Wait, they literally have to open the folders and read through them page by page, looking for a needle in a 30-year-old haystack.
Yes, exactly.
Now, what happens if they actually find one?
If a reviewer finds a timely VA Form 9 sitting in a closed file, the VA is legally compelled to instantly resurrect the appeal. They must notify the veteran, place the case directly onto the docket of the Board of Veterans' Appeals, and process it without any further delay.
The financial implications of that are mind-bending.
Oh, massive.
If a veteran was wrongfully denied a 100% disability rating in 1992, and the board grants the appeal today, we are talking about more than 30 years of retroactive back pay. That is hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is a level of generational wealth being restored to families who were robbed of it by a clerical error.
And the settlement expands beyond just the manual review, actually.
Agreed.
Yeah. The VA is also required to proactively mail notices to an additional 64,599 individuals. These are claimants whose files didn't trigger the automatic manual review threshold, but matched enough of the criteria to warrant a warning.
Okay, so a slightly lower threshold.
Right. Those 64,000 individuals will have the right to formally demand the VA pull their file and check it as well. So we are talking about nearly 100,000 lives potentially altered by the unearthing of ghost paperwork.
It is a monumental effort to clean up historical administrative failures. But while the courts are forcing the government to fix its own internal mistakes, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are fighting a completely different war against external predators who exploit the sheer complexity of the system.
Yes. The labyrinthine nature of VA law, all the forms, the deadlines, the medical nexus letters, It creates a desperate demographic of veterans who just want someone to guide them through the maze. And wherever there is desperation, there is exploitation.
Always.
This is the catalyst for the Safeguard Veterans Act.
Introduced on June 2 by a bipartisan coalition, Representatives Janelle Bynum, Chris Pappas, Don Bacon, Mike Lawler in the House, and Senator Richard Blumenthal in the Senate. The entire focus of this legislation is to eradicate a cottage industry of unaccredited private companies that veteran advocacy groups refer to as claim sharks.
A claim shark is a private entity that promises to help a veteran secure a higher disability rating from the VA. But they charge exorbitant, often predatory fees for the service.
How much are we talking?
They frequently demand a massive percentage of the veteran's retroactive back pay, or they lock the veteran into contracts requiring them to pay thousands of dollars over several years.
And to understand the audacity of this business model, we have to look at the legal ecosystem of veterans' benefits. Because a veteran never actually has to pay a single dime to get world-class, highly trained legal representation for a VA claim.
That is the core tragedy here. The VA officially accredits highly trained representatives, veteran service officers, or VSOs who work for massive nonprofit organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and the Disabled American Veterans.
The big groups.
Right. These VSOs spend months learning the intricacies of Title 38, which is the federal code governing veterans' benefits. And they provide their services completely, 100% free of charge to any veteran who asks.
So if a free government-vetted expert is sitting in an office ready to do your paperwork perfectly, why is a private company in a strip mall able to charge a veteran $10,000 for the exact same service?
Because the claim sharks utilize aggressive marketing and they exploit a massive loophole in federal enforcement. Title 38 actually dictates that it is illegal for an unaccredited agent to charge a fee for preparing, presenting, or prosecuting a VA claim. The law is literally on the books.
Okay, if it's already illegal, why do we need the Safeguard Act? Why aren't federal prosecutors just shutting these companies down?
Because the law is fundamentally toothless. When Congress wrote the statute banning the fees, they failed to attach any strict criminal penalties to the violation. It is a prohibition without a punishment.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
I'm serious. The Department of Justice and the VA Office of Inspector General have essentially thrown their hands up, arguing they cannot effectively prosecute or shut down these massive companies because the legal framework doesn't give them the criminal authority to do so.
Unbelievable.
Bad actors read the statute, realize they can't be sent to prison, and just continue raking in millions of dollars in the gray area.
It is a law built on the honor system, being exploited by people with zero honor, and their tactics are incredibly invasive. The sources point out that these companies aren't just putting up billboards on the highway. They are using automated robocalls designed to intercept veterans.
Yes. They deploy data scraping operations. They target veterans who are actively trying to contact VA call centers or legitimate VSOs. They intercept them with digital marketing or robocalls and divert them into a high-pressure sales funnel before the veteran ever realizes they could get the help for free.
So how does the Safeguard Bill actually arm the federal government to stop this?
It is a comprehensive tactical strike on the claim shark business model. First and foremost, it restores hard, unavoidable criminal penalties for violating the fee ban. If you operate an unaccredited company and you charge a veteran for claims assistance, you are now committing a federal crime with tangible consequences.
That immediately changes the risk calculus for these companies. I mean, nobody wants to go to federal prison.
Exactly. Second, the bill permanently blacklists any individual or entity found guilty of these practices from ever receiving official VA accreditation in the future.
Good.
Third, it specifically outlaws the use of robocalls and data scraping targeted at VA systems.
Right.
And finally, it executes a vital federal override.
What that?
Several of these claim shark companies operate in states that have weak consumer protection laws, arguing that state law permits their contracts. The Safeguard Act explicitly overrides any state law allowing these fees, creating an impenetrable nationwide federal shield around the veterans' benefits.
It is incredibly rare to see such aggressive, bipartisan consensus on Capitol Hill. You have progressive Democrats and conservative Republicans locking arms with every major veteran organization in the country to crush this specific industry. They are entirely united on protecting the veterans' money from private scams.
But the irony is profound. Because while Congress is fiercely united on how to protect the money from claim sharks, they are currently engaged in a brutal, deeply partisan war over how the federal government itself should pay for the very benefits they are protecting.
And this brings us to the final and most explosive story in our deep dive: the mega bill dilemma. Now, this next piece of legislation is easily the most controversial topic in our stack today. And just to be completely clear with you listening, our job here isn't to tell you who is right or who is wrong in this political fight.
No, not at all.
We aren't endorsing either the proponents or the opponents. We're simply going to break down the mechanics of the bill, the math behind the funding, and the exact arguments being deployed by both sides so you can understand why Capitol Hill is currently tearing itself apart over this.
Right. It is an objective analysis of the legislative mechanics. So on Thursday, June 11th, the Republican leaders of the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees, Representative Mike Boust and Senator Jerry Moran, introduced a colossal piece of legislation called the Take Care of America's Veterans Act.
When we say colossal, we are talking about a 554-page behemoth. The sponsors essentially took 60 separate, standalone veterans bills that were languishing in various stages of committee purgatory, bundled them all together into one massive package, and are trying to force it straight to the floor for an immediate vote.
It is a high-stakes legislative maneuver. By bundling highly popular, long-demanded benefits expansions with controversial funding mechanisms, you force lawmakers into an agonizing binary choice.
Yep.
You either vote against a bill that contains incredible benefits for your constituents, or you vote for a bill that contains structural changes you absolutely despise.
Let's look at the carrots in the bundle first, because the expansions in this package are things the veteran community have been begging for decades. The crown jewel of the package is the Major Richard Starr Act.
Yes. To understand the Starr Act, we have to explore a deeply unpopular, centuries-old quirk in federal law regarding dual compensation.
Let's hear it.
Currently, there are roughly 54,000 combat-injured veterans who were medically retired from the military before reaching the standard 20 years of service. They are known as Chapter 61 retirees.
Okay.
Because they were injured in combat, they receive VA disability compensation. But because of a law dating back to the 1890s designed to prevent federal employees from double-dipping from two government funding streams, their military retirement pay is legally deducted or offset dollar for dollar by the amount of their VA disability pay.
Which feels like an unbelievable betrayal. I mean, you get blown up in combat, the military retires you early because you are too broken to serve, and then the government uses your disability check to pay for your retirement check.
Yeah.
You're essentially funding your own retirement with your blood.
Veteran advocates have fought to end this offset for generations. The Starr Act would completely eliminate it, allowing those 54,000 combat-injured veterans to collect their full military retirement pension and their full VA disability compensation concurrently.
And the political urgency here is wild. The sources mention that just 24 hours before this mega bill was introduced, a standalone vote to pass the Starr Act was blocked in the Senate.
Yep.
So bundling it into this 554-page package is a deliberate tactic to shield it from individual procedural blocks. And the Starr Act isn't the only massive expansion riding in this cart.
No, it also includes the Love Lives On Act. Currently, if a military spouse is widowed, they receive survivor benefits. But if they choose to remarry before the age of 55, the government strips those benefits away. It is known as the remarriage penalty.
Awful.
This bill would abolish that penalty entirely. The package also includes the Veterans Access Act, which drastically expands the criteria, allowing a veteran to bypass the VA system entirely and seek medical care from private civilian doctors at the government's expense.
So on paper, this 554-page bill is a historic, legacy-defining expansion of veteran rights, care, and financial compensation.
Yes, on paper.
But here's the multi-billion-dollar question. How does a government that is already drowning in national debt actually pay for 60 new bills?
That is the epicenter of the conflict. Under congressional PAYGO rules, pay-as-you-go, you cannot introduce legislation that drastically increases mandatory spending without simultaneously introducing a mechanism to cut spending elsewhere to balance the ledger.
Ready to find the money.
To pay for the Starr Act and the 59 other bills, the authors of this package have proposed a fundamental structural change to how the VA will evaluate two specific medical conditions moving forward: tinnitus and sleep apnea.
Tinnitus being a constant ringing in the ears, and sleep apnea being a condition where you repeatedly stop breathing during sleep. How does changing the evaluation for those two conditions generate billions of dollars in savings?
It comes down to a shift from subjective symptom reporting to objective functional impairment. Under the current decades-old rating schedule, if a veteran can prove their military service caused tinnitus, perhaps, from working on a flight line without hearing protection, they're almost universally granted a 10% disability rating.
And that comes with a monthly check.
Exactly. Tinnitus is actually the single most commonly claimed disability in the entire VA system.
Because it is entirely subjective. There is no blood test for a ringing ear. You just have to tell the doctor it rings.
Exactly. The proposed change in this legislation would alter the rating criteria so that tinnitus, as a standalone symptom, would effectively start resulting in a compensable financial rating for future claims. They would view it as a symptom of broader hearing loss rather than a standalone compensable disability.
Wow. Okay, what about sleep apnea?
The change to sleep apnea is even more drastic in its financial implications. Under current rules, if a veteran is diagnosed with severe sleep apnea related to their service, and they are prescribed a CPAP machine, the mask you wear at night that forces air into your airway, the VA automatically grants them a 50% disability rating.
And a 50% rating is worth hundreds of dollars a month.
Yes, because the dependency on the machine dictates the severity of the rating.
Right, so what's the change?
Under the proposed new rules in this megabill, the logic is entirely inverted. The new criteria argues that if the CPAP machine successfully treats the sleep apnea, meaning the veteran sleeps normally while wearing the mask, then the disability is considered resolved or 0% disabling.
Oh, wow.
The veteran would still get the CPAP machine for free from the medical side, but the monthly financial compensation from the benefit side would drop to zero.
And that funding mechanism has ignited a political powder keg.
Truly.
Let's look at the arguments from the proponents first. The leaders of the Veterans Affairs Committees who authored this offset argue that it is mathematically impossible to pass the STAR Act without finding the money somewhere.
They defend the changes by arguing they are modernizing an outdated rating schedule to reflect current medical realities. A CPAP machine in 2026 is highly effective and minimally intrusive compared to when the rules were originally written decades ago.
All right, that's their perspective, yeah.
Crucially, the proponents emphasize that nobody who currently holds a rating for tinnitus or sleep apnea will lose a single cent. They argue the existing ratings are grandfathered in, and the new, stricter criteria will only apply to veterans who file new claims after the bill becomes law.
But the opponents of this bill are looking at that exact same math and screaming from the rooftops. The sources cite a massive coalition of opposition, including the Disabled American Veterans, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Common Defense, and Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal.
The opposition's financial analysis is staggering. They calculate that stripping compensable ratings for future tinnitus and sleep apnea claims equates to a $57 billion cut to veterans' benefits over the next 10 years.
$57 billion.
Yes. They project this structural change will negatively impact the financial stability of 1.5 million future veterans.
$57 billion removed from the pockets of future claimants to pay for the current expansions. And the veterans organizations fundamentally dispute the proponents' promise that current ratings are safe.
Yes, Coleman Ney, the national commander of the DAV, actively challenges the grandfather clause. He points out the administrative reality of the VA. Veterans frequently go in for routine medical reevaluations of their existing conditions.
Right, they get called in all the time.
He argues that the moment a grandfathered veteran walks into a clinic for a routine checkup on their sleep apnea, the VA adjudicators will inevitably apply the new, stricter criteria and slash their existing rating down to zero.
The philosophical argument from the opposition is even more pointed. Carol Whitmore, the national commander of the VFW, stated that veterans' benefits are an earned moral obligation of the federal government. They are a cost of war.
Right.
Her argument is that you do not finance a moral obligation by cannibalizing the benefits of the next generation. You don't pay for a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran's combat pension by telling a 25-year-old soldier returning from a deployment tomorrow that their sleep apnea is no longer a compensable injury.
Senator Blumenthal echoed this, warning of a staggeringly negative impact on future generations. He also pointed out a bit of legislative hypocrisy.
What did he say?
The idea to slash the sleep apnea ratings was originally floated by the VA back in 2022 as a way to free up internal funds to hire more mental health professionals. Now, Congress is hijacking that same offset to pay for their 554-page legislative package.
It sets up an unbelievable game of high-stakes legislative chicken. The Republican sponsors want this passed immediately, viewing it as a massive, legacy-defining triumph heading into the nation's 250th birthday next month.
Right.
But the veteran organizations and the Democrats are fundamentally opposed to the core funding mechanism, viewing it as a betrayal of future soldiers.
The unresolved question hanging over Capitol Hill is whether the controversial offsets regarding hearing and sleep conditions will survive the floor debate. Will the sponsors be forced to strip the $57 billion offset out and find the money somewhere else, perhaps by raising taxes or cutting spending in non-veteran sectors?
Or will the fierce opposition from the VFW and the DAV ultimately sink the entire 554-page ship, taking the STAR Act, the Love Lives On Act, and 58 other promises down to the bottom of the ocean with it?
The stakes are astronomical, particularly for any active duty service member who is preparing to transition to civilian life and file their initial claims next year. They are walking into a system whose very financial architecture is currently being fought over.
And that profound uncertainty brings us all the way back to the core dichotomy we started with.
It really does.
So what does this all mean? If you look at the entirety of this deep dive, these 8 stories from a single week in June 2026, you see an institution that is violently wrestling with its own immense scale.
Absolutely.
You see a Department of Veterans Affairs capable of busying paradigm-shifting speed. They're clearing 2 million claims, bypassing contracting bottlenecks to get amputees walking 40 days faster, wiring global medical databases together, and pushing cutting-edge virtual reality technology to heal chronic pain without opioids.
But simultaneously, you see a massive bureaucracy burdened by the ghosts of its own systemic failures. You see an agency staring down 30-year-old lost paperwork, operating on archaic evidence standards that disproportionately deny victims of sexual trauma, fighting off private predators, and relying on a fractured, deeply partisan legislative process that struggles to fund its promises without structurally penalizing the next generation in line.
It is the absolute friction of the freight train. You get incredible, unstoppable momentum, but the danger of what gets crushed beneath the wheels is always present. We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week, building on that massive 554-page legislative battle we just unpacked.
The big one.
When a society bundles 60 promises to its aging veterans into one massive bill, but determines it mathematically has to reduce the financial value of a future veteran's hearing or sleep in order to balance the ledger, are we actually expanding the definition of care, or are we simply shifting the endless debt of war from one generation of veterans to the next?
It's a complex, painful question, and it's the exact question the entire system is grappling with right now.
Thank you for joining us today for this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, keep learning.